Well, welcome to the 700 Club. From 2016 to 2019, transgender surgeries nearly tripled in the U.S. Nearly 8% of patients receiving trans medical care were between the ages of 8, if you can believe that, 8 years old to 12.
Well, states across the country are raising laws restricting things like surgery, puberty blockers, and hormones for kids. But trans activists are fighting back. As Charlene Aaron reports, the nation's courts are now weighing in on the debate.
Trans activists are challenging state bans on gender-affirming care in federal courts across the country. If these courts reach different conclusions, the Supreme Court may ultimately have to weigh in. Christy Sisson recalls the pain of her college daughter's decision to become a man.
She started taking testosterone, and within 6 months, her voice had dropped. She had started growing facial hair.
Eventually, she chose a double mastectomy. A new report in the Journal of the American Medical Association shows transgender surgeries nearly tripled in the U.S. between 2016 and 2019. The numbers rising from about 4,500 to an astounding 13,000. Researchers estimate those numbers may be even higher. And almost 8% of those patients were children between the ages of 8 and 12 years old. 19-year-old Chloe Cole says she lived as a transgender boy for years before returning to her female identity. She testified recently at a congressional hearing on gender-affirming care for children.
The gender specialist I was taken to see told my parents that I needed to be put on puberty-blocking drugs right away. They asked my parents a simple question: would you rather have a dead daughter or a living transgender son? The choice was enough for my parents to let their guard down.
After taking puberty blockers and testosterone, Chloe, who is suing Kaiser Permanente for providing gender transitioning treatment and surgery when she was just 15, now lives with regret.
I look in the mirror sometimes and I feel like a monster.
The medical professionals are pushing this because once the kids start taking hormones, they're on them for the rest of their lives. So this is a big money maker for the medical community.
Mary Rice Hassan, attorney and policy expert at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, agrees.
Putting minors on puberty-suppressing drugs and then putting them on what are called cross-sex hormones, which are really toxic doses, high doses of hormones, testosterone or estrogen, and then oftentimes leading towards surgery. And we know that this means once a kid goes down this path, they become a medical customer for life.
Despite the trend, there is a growing resistance. More than 20 Republican-led states have adopted laws restricting medical care for transgender children. A Missouri law bans trans surgery for children and prohibits prescribing puberty blockers or hormones to patients under 18. That's also the law in North Carolina, where GOP lawmakers overrode Democratic Governor Roy Cooper's veto of several bills banning medical care for transgender minors.
I'm thankful that the legislators here in North Carolina have acted on their conscience and have done what they could to protect youth from these awful drugs that are being given to children. Thankfully, the conservative majority made it happen.
In Missouri and Texas, judges allowed the ban to go forward, while an Arkansas judge ruled against the state's legislation banning gender-affirming health care for minors. With many of these laws facing such lawsuits and higher courts disagreeing, Hassan and other legal experts believe the Supreme Court will ultimately need to weigh in.
So even though you have those states doing that good work, we have an equal number of states, unfortunately, that have become very aggressive, where the attorneys general from those particular states are saying, no, we think parents should be able to choose this, quote, gender-affirming care. And so they're trying to wrap it up in parental rights.
She is looking for the High Court to decide in those states' favor.
What I'm hoping the Supreme Court will do when this lands again in their lap is to underscore the reality of sex, male or female, It's determined at conception. It can't change.
The pressure to evaluate the science is building. The American Academy of Pediatrics has asked an outside commission to review the medical evidence for transgender medical treatment for children. Still, Hassan is suspicious because of the Academy's current policy.
I'm not very confident simply because at the same time they're saying they're going to do this evidence review, they came out and they said, well, we're supporting the policy as is. And our purpose in doing this is so that we can push back on any limits, any attempt to protect children from these interventions that have lifelong, irreversible consequences.
As the battle wages on, Hassan says protecting the hearts, bodies, and minds of the nation's youth is worth the fight.
It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of people having the courage of their convictions, speaking the truth, reaching out to those who've been led down a false path and reaching out with love and compassion, but a willingness to speak the truth.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, I think I grew up in a very innocent age. This was absolutely unthinkable when I was 8 years old, 12 years old. You heard no discussions about it at all. It wasn't even part of the conversation. Terry, what do you think is responsible here? Why the rise of this? It just seems amazing that it's tripled in just 4 years.
Without getting into deep weeds here, theologically, let me just say that I think destroying our image of ourselves as made in the image and likeness of God is probably the number one move on the part of the enemy of God. That said, I mean, when you look at this, I feel like there's so many issues in our country where common sense has just been lost. I mean, we know that children are still developing, they're still growing, they don't know who they are. Even kids when they're in college, you know, are still trying to figure out, who am I? What do I want to do? What's it like to make friends and live on my own independently? To make a life-changing medical decision that's going to put you on some kind of a medical list and taking drugs for the rest of your life is not something to be done when you're a child. And honestly, I think you almost ought to be an age where you are grown up enough and mature enough to make that decision yourself, not parents making it. I mean, parents should be protecting their children,
right.
But not making
It seems like the medical community is making that decision and overriding parents. And that question, would you rather have a dead child or a transition child? Is that being driven by, I mean, it was said in the piece, you now have a patient for life.
Yeah, and kind of a manipulative question, which children are wont to do when they are certain ages, you know. Let me have my way, and then I'll be happy. And that's a perfect example to me of someone who is allowed to do that, who's anything but happy and still struggling to deal with the repercussions of it. I mean, the whole issue needs plenty of time and plenty of opportunity for kids to mature, for parents to stand up and take their rightful position and say, I have a son, I have a daughter. When you're old enough to make this decision yourself, let's talk about that together, but not to let children, just because they're bent one way or another today or tomorrow. Obviously, it changes from what we've seen in that report. What I may feel at 12, I might not feel at 20.
Well, also the medical evidence, which I'm amazed the pediatric doctors in America won't look at it.
Yes.
But the medical evidence seems to suggest, and if not prove, this isn't working.
Yeah.
And so why are we taking 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds? Why are we taking them through this?
And then into the courts we go. Another maze.
Yes.
Another maze.